You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on the show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. Year 16, moving right along, folks. We're deep in September and we're talking all about AI today. Go figure, large language models, Gen AI, embeddings, all that kind of fun stuff. We're going to talk about content creation and orchestration and delivery, and using AI to really understand what's working and what's not. So to be blunt, I'm very excited about the panel of guests we have today. We got our good buddy Eugene Burke online to help me dive into the details here, but we'll also talk to Mark Ruddock and also Shubham Mishra. Mark is from a company called Kontent.ai, and Shubham is from a company called Pixis. And this is very interesting stuff. So let me throw out my number one complaint, which we talked about on the show, with respect to social media and marketing and understanding and getting the word out and talking to people and getting them to resonate and connect with you, et cetera. Well, the numbers that you get from social media, especially once you start throwing money at this stuff, just go bonkers and they don't really line up. And when you look at how many clicks I got versus how many conversions versus how many views and all this stuff, it tends to not make a whole lot of sense. And that's because these different engines have different models by which they calculate things, and they're changing the rules. And this is my big beef, quite frankly, is that they change the rules on us and we don't really know what they're changing or how they're changing it. They're private enterprises, so they can do that. But I'm a big fan of transparency and saying, hey, here's what's happening. And let's not forget about third-party cookies apparently going away. Well, when that happens, assuming it really does happen, that's like pulling the rug out from underneath every digital marketer in the world, and it's going to be incredibly disruptive. So what does that mean? It means you want to focus on first-party data, really understand your customers, know what data you have, be able to correlate that, understand it, and then be able to manage and track all this omni-channel communication stuff, which itself is a huge challenge. But it's going to be fun. And I think the two gentlemen on the call today from these companies, and Eugene will probably vouch for this, are doing very, very interesting things. So let's focus. Maybe first I'll bring in Shubham Mishra from Pixis. Congrats on your funding. That's very exciting stuff. You're growing very quickly. I think you said 200 customers worldwide. And you're doing very interesting things. Tell our audience, what is the upshot of Pixis? How are you helping companies get more for their money in the world of social media and content generation?
For sure. So primarily, we just giving you a background, we started Pixis somewhere around 4.5 years back, and trying to solve this one problem of allocating whenever you're spending dollars on digital marketing, it needs to be allocated in the right manner with the right communication at the right time. So solving all the three problems together using artificial intelligence is definitely possible. I would say 2 or 3 years back, it was not completely end-to-end doable using AI, but right now you can have all the engines, 3 engines targeting creative and at the same time performance marketing. All of that could be interlinked, and a seamless feedback motion could be built out. And to addressing to your point, that also solves a big problem where there is a huge difference in funnel. There is an amazing level of drop off. It's like unbelievable to see how you get tons of clicks and then there is no conversion. And in order to solve that, what we did basically, we built connectors that directly connect into your CRM, where AI will only look at one data, which is conversion that matters to your business, because ultimately everyone is spending money to generate more money out of that. So it should better do that. So that's where our AI systems have been super to the point. And I would say one more very interesting piece about the system that we have built out, that it's so seamless that it connects just via a Chrome plugin. So you can
Hmm.
deploy the most sophisticated AI just using a Chrome plugin, and it sits inside your existing dashboard. So you don't even have to like go to another dashboard. You can just create one column in your Facebook Manager, Google Manager. So it doesn't disrupt your flow, because
Hmm.
we initially built a lot of panels, dashboards, and our customers were like, we want to use AI, but it should be an operator. So why don't you operate on my dashboard rather than taking me to somewhere else?
How interesting is that? We had a great quote the other day on this show. One of the guests said, AI is an implementation detail. I thought that was a pretty clever way to put things, but you're right. Like where you actually consume the information matters, and where you want to consume it is where you normally consume the information. So you're sort of piggybacking on their existing dashboard, but giving them this crucial piece of information, which is, hey, what's working and what's not. And to me, that's the kicker, right? Is trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work is a very significant challenge. And you were joking that media buying or media planning should kind of be a thing of the past, in part because you want to let the engine tell you where to put money. Now, I would imagine it takes time, but if you have a critical mass of data already with 200 existing customers, then you know what the workflows look like, you know what the numbers roughly look like, and can fairly quickly map that to new clients. I'm just guessing. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely, because what we did basically, we built AI models in the industry by industry level, and also a generic model which picks up all the learnings from all the models. So that's generic parameters. But as the system gets more and more confidence in every sector, it becomes so powerful that the moment, like for example, just giving an example, if we have some users who are using banking us in banking, then a new person who applies a solution already starts from a level 1 or 2. They're not starting from level 0. So
Mhm.
obviously there is a learning curve that is built in, but it's so seamless that it connects directly with your existing workflows, all your existing dashboards, and all your existing places, that it becomes seamless.
And so, if I understand it correctly, you are connecting to, of course, these external sources like Facebook, Instagram, that the endpoints, if you will, where the content is delivered, and you're pulling some data from them to see what they say. But then you're also kind of sitting in the middle between those worlds and the content management system or CRM or whatever system the client has. So you're kind of sitting in between those worlds, taking data back and forth and feeding scores essentially to the client so that they can better understand what to buy. And then I'm guessing you've got some automated workflows you could put on top of that. Is that right?
Exactly, because I would say a recommendative AI is definitely interesting, but it's slowly becoming the thing of the past. If AI is super powerful and if it is competitive enough, then it should go ahead and take actions, and the
Hmm.
action should ultimately result into cost savings. So for us, the way we define our solution, it's like very strong robotic process automation coupled with the most powerful brain of artificial intelligence.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Well, let's stick around for the roundtables. Let's bring Mark Ruddock in from Kontent.ai. And I know, Mark, you're a brand new CEO over there at Kontent.ai, so you're just getting the ball rolling. But you're doing another piece of this puzzle, which is the content orchestration and getting this content to all these different endpoints. I mean, I remember the first time I heard omni-channel, I was like, oh, what is that? It doesn't sound good. Then I figured out what it was. I was like, oh, I was right. It's a pain because you have all these different endpoints, from a design perspective. That's why people use React and things of this nature. But from a design perspective, it's kind of a nightmare. And that's just one part of the challenges, right? It's also how the content gets fed, how it's displayed, how it gets consumed, et cetera. So you're targeting another really critical part of this whole challenge from the content orchestration side. Tell us a bit about that and how it works.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the best way for me to explain what we do is to kind of tell you a real client story without naming names. Imagine if you're a multi-product, multi-brand, multi-region company. You've got 600 websites around the world and you publish in 20 languages and you operate in multiple locations with different regulatory regimes, different localization rules, different norms, etc. You don't really want to be cutting and pasting that content across M by N sites and then trying to
Right.
manage it out there in the wild. So what we
Right.
do is we enable companies like that to manage their content in a central location, and then move it very rapidly out to the places in which it is used. But most importantly, we help that entire content supply chain of governance and, reuse, language translation, localization, and so on, all operate in an increasingly automated fashion. And so, if you are a company with 600 websites in 20 languages and multiple products, we are sort of the solution to that problem. And I think the interesting place that intersects with Shubham's work is that increasingly, we're not just looking at the content supply chain of moving content out to the front line, but we want to collect the efficacy of that content, how it works, and bring that back into the systems so that the next time content gets created, it is even more compelling and even more effective. Mm-hmm. And so what we are doing across that entire supply chain is leaning very heavily into AI in order to provide a lot more automation and to reduce the cost and the kind of mechanical turk that exists today in these companies between a piece of content being created and where it ends up in the world.
Yeah. Well, and I know, like for YouTube, for example, there is tremendous data that you can pull about when someone stopped watching it, how long they watched. And one of the companies I talked to that does this sort of analysis, this girl is amazing. She was talking about how there are best practices for when the logo shows up, there's best practices for when the call to action comes in, for the colors, the graphics, the music, all this stuff comes into play. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're able to pull that data and associate it with the particular piece of content and give some sort of score on that. So this one is doing very well with this demographic, that one's not doing so well. And all this speaks to the need to be very agile with your content, which is a difficult thing, or at least it used to be difficult. Now it's going to be a little bit easier with generative AI. And the content creators are going to be using some of these technologies and then really polishing and fine tuning and cherry picking. What do you think?
I think that's what Shubham does really well today, that sort of that endpoint analysis. We would love to plug into that endpoint analysis and feed it right back into the beginning of the orchestration process so that the next content that gets created is optimized for that. So I think we're actually, in a way, kind of complementary. I think our primary role today is in helping companies write, validate, and then move content into the endpoints in which it's going to be consumed, meeting governance and other needs along the way. Where we want to get to with AI in particular is leveraging the information, for example, from something like Shubham's app, to then retrain the AI so that the next content that comes out is structured and, positioned and tagged in a way that is going to generate an even greater yield. And that notion of automating the return on content is, I think, a really interesting place.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so you're sort of in a CDP space. It's almost like a supercharged content management system is kind of what it sounds like to me, right? Because media companies, of course, typically, historically have built their own content management systems. These days, a lot of them just use WordPress and, kind of rely on that as their horse, and they try to optimize it. But it's always been a very complex space, in part because the ontologies underneath can be complex and just the moving parts. And when you try to start adding stuff, it just gets harder and harder to manage that. So you're sort of offloading a lot of that headache and work for your clients by giving them an engine which does all that stuff. Is that right?
We have clients that have 900,000 pieces of content. And today, or historically, those clients manage that content largely manually. And we give them a system in which they can properly organize that content, apply the appropriate taxonomy to it so that it can be reused and so on. Where we are leaning into with AI is automating that process of analyzing the existing content repositories that they have, using the AI to better organize those content repositories, using the AI to identify which content is working and which is not working, and automate the process of optimizing that whole content place. And I think that is it's a really interesting problem. When you've got 900,000 pieces of content, how on earth do you keep it fresh?
Yeah. Right. I'll bring in Eugene Burke to kind of comment on this. What's exciting, Eugene, is that, and we've already heard this today in the conversation, these AI algorithms, which can be very powerful, can also be inserted anywhere in the workflow. So way out at the end, somewhere in the middle, automating the process of delivery. Like there are different algorithms that do different things. And I think Shubham was kind of talking about that earlier. But to me, Eugene, that's the blessing and the curse right now, right? Is that there are so many different ways you can tackle this. You just kind of have to start somewhere and start climbing the mountain. What do you think, Eugene?
Yeah. So what I heard from the listening carefully to the difference of where Shubham's describing his particular secret sauce and where they're focusing, what problems they're addressing, as opposed to what I hear Shubham saying is we're optimizing the understanding of the effectiveness of a piece of content as it's delivered to that audience of one. And what I heard Mark saying is we have the pain point that our customers bring to us is the sheer logistic difficulty of managing content in all the places around the world where that content needs to be, and to make sure that it's not obsolete, not because it's obsolete, it's not violating some kind of regulatory compliance rule, and that is a nightmare. So did I understand your value props correctly?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's mine, yes.
That is very interesting because in managing teams that are implementing, one, I was looking up what one were we implementing 6 months ago, and it's the one that ends in FUL. You probably know it. And there are pain points in every solution. And our challenge was, how do we make sure that we're not inadvertently serving up content that is illegal, like serving up content in California where we're not licensed to, those kinds of things.
Right.
AI, and I also understood, Shubham, that your particular AI solution is a learning algorithmic solution. So it gets smarter as it learns. So in attacking the problems that your customers have brought to you, to Eric's point, where do you see the solution evolving and becoming smarter so that some of the things that Shubham was saying, like the old things that we used to do, should just go away? So what functions of the content delivery lifecycle, from your solution's perspective, are going to go away, and why?
Yeah, in 30 seconds. It's real quick. Just give a quick answer and we'll come back to that. Go ahead, Shubham.
Yeah, sure. So according to me, I think it'll change and transform on two sides. First is the user experience side. On the user experience side, I very strongly believe that our systems will evolve into just a simple chatbot that integrates with Slack and stuff. And you can just it goes back, like AI will evolve stuff, but give comfort. So any marketing manager can just,
yeah, we'll pick this up after the break. So we're talking with a couple experts today on AI, content generation, content delivery, content scoring. All these things are very important. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back to DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, with an all-star cast once again. Our good buddy Eugene Burke is here, but we're also talking to Mark Ruddock and Shubham Mishra. And Shubham was making a point right before the last break, and he was answering a question from Eugene about where in the workflows does Pixis automate and help? And you had started answering that question, but basically where along the line are you tackling some of the more unwieldy challenges to be able to automate stuff such that people can get more done and get it done better? Go ahead, Shubham.
For sure. In terms of where Pixis integrates in the workflow for automation, I would say three pieces. And it's exactly very first principle based thinking, because the first piece is where you need to identify whom to target. So our systems integrate with the CRMs. It understands the CRMs, your conversion data. It connects with your Facebook, Google channel, and all the different platforms, delivery platforms. maps it out, overlaps the data with different data sources, external data sources like SEMrush, SimilarWeb, to understand your competitor, how your competitor is doing the marketing right now. And at the same time, then it'll throw out certain keywords or certain, I would say, cohorts that you should be targeting. That's the first step. Now, for example, if it threw out a cohort that you should be targeting male 25 to 30-year-old in Philadelphia. Now, the second step is, how do you design a content for that? So what we did, basically, we have our own LLM systems, which could be hyper-tuned based on that region itself. How do we do that? There is a scraper technology built in, which goes out there and it'll scan up all the, I would say, all the information, all the data, and what is liked by 25 to 30-year-old in Philadelphia. What are they reading? What kind of blogs are they reading? It feeds it back into the LLM. The LLM gets skewed so that whatever copy you have written as a brand, it rewrites it in a manner that it becomes hyper personalized, integrating slangs and everything, just based in that region. The third piece is, now when you do both these things, you create a problem. You create a problem of too many, because now you have, earlier you were running like 2 or 3 advertisements, 1 or 2 variations. It was easy. You can just throw in like 2 more people in the team and it could be managed. But now imagine doing it at scale, where you have published like 1,500 ads, and everything has to be managed in a manner. And and budgets have to be distributed. If you're spending like $20 million, it has to be distributed across all of them in the rightful manner, and across 6 channels like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of them. So that's a third piece, which all of it gets converged over there. We have simple algorithms for clients to spend little money, like multi-arm bandits, not real, I would say, not the real AI, but multi-arm bandits could do the job if you're spending less. To the other level, where we have LLMs just to optimize and take decisions on your behalf. So, and the best part is, we have connected it directly to Facebook and Google's release notes, so it can keep reading that if there is any change in the algorithm which they're bringing about and stuff, it'll transform. That allows you to end-to-end do all the 3 pieces. And also there is a feedback loop which is connected, so it allows you to do all of it in no time.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And, Eugene and I are working on a bit of a stealth project, and we may need to talk to you in greater detail about that last part, because using the notes, the release notes, that's something I talked about just yesterday, plugging that in as an embedding, such that the system knows, okay, that has now been updated. This now works with that. I mean, wow, that's some pretty cool stuff. But Eugene, take it away.
Yeah, Mark, I understood your particular approach to this challenge is really on the logistics of create centrally, but distribute to the edge intelligently. Tell me how you guys approach that.
Yeah, and in fact, let me answer the sort of AI question as well, because we're dealing actually with very different kinds of content today. So, if you are looking at a client of ours who's a healthcare provider who is trying to ensure that really precise healthcare data is moved to their frontline workers, or maybe to their extranet, to their doctor network, there is no way that content can be fully AI automated today. It's impossible for that to happen. It is too risky, and so on. So let me walk you through the world of today, and then maybe walk you through the world of AI in those big companies. So the world of today is, there's an entire mechanical Turk of people that has to review that content after it is written in the first draft, before it gets anywhere near a public consumption. That includes brand people, it includes the typical editors, it includes localization, it includes translation perhaps, and it includes lawyers, because nothing is going to go out there unless it meets the M by N box of what's allowed where. That is a very complex, time-consuming, expensive process. What AI is going to do is not write that content automatically going forward, but what it's going to do, as soon as the writer finishes the content, or even as they're writing that content, it is going to be highlighting for that writer the issues that they are likely to fail on downstream in the workflow. It's going to bring it right to them and say, you know what, this is not going to pass legal review. This is not going to pass brand review. You need to rewrite this in a tone of voice change. This is not going to pass localization review in Florida. And so before we waste time sending it downstream for review, we get it the issues captured up front. That is the way in which AI is going to influence our supply chains going forward. What I think is happening in the more kind of direct retail advertising world is a lot more free form. That's not going to be possible in our customers for some time to come. So tremendous AI involvement in that workflow, but not complete AI automation, not end to end, computers writing.
I would agree with you, Mark, that pharma and healthcare and health insurance are use cases that are very, very difficult to automate, very difficult to inject intelligence into. And if you can get some kind of widget that will jump up and down on top of the lawyer's desk to make them move faster, or to make it so issues don't appear in the lawyer's inbox, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, or even if it arrives at the lawyer and the thing says, "Hey, lawyer, these are 5 areas that I've flagged. You should really take a close look at." You don't necessarily have to read every word every time. I think that's where you start to see significant incremental improvements.
Yeah. And we were talking before about how even in the US, there is a complexity of the regulatory regime such that content that's fine in Oklahoma cannot show up in California, and content that is fine in California may not show up in Utah for various reasons. And so having intelligence to be able to flag issues in the content authoring, creation, review, and publication or deployment process, I've seen this process take, on the minimum 6 to 8 weeks, where you have to think, okay, it's the beginning of May. I need to get this content out by the 4th of July. Do I have time, right? And it really should not be that time consuming.
Yeah.
Look, I think there are some really interesting ideas coming here right away. One of them is, you talk about the first draft of content that has to go to Florida, has to go to Oklahoma, has to go to whatever. Today, that has to be written multiple times. But what if the AI drafts the Oklahoma version, drafts the Florida version, and so on, so that at least you've got a head start on that? It's the same thing with localization translation. I think that's where you're going to start to see some real benefit.
Interesting.
No, this is very interesting. And then, not to open up a big old can of worms here more than halfway through the show, but when you start talking about regulatory regimes and policies, it's been probably 5 or 6 years now since I ran into my first AI infused contract management system at an SAP conference, where they can look at all of your contracts, and if some rule changes, they can say, hey, you need to look at this contract, and that one, because you're going to have exposure now. That starts to get very, very interesting in terms of managing contracts, managing compliance, all this stuff. I mean, let's be honest, compliance is a pain, right? It is. It's a pain to deal with, but I think it's not going to be nearly as much of a pain to deal with going forward, because with these new models, you understand the Gen AI models don't just know text. They're not just text predictors, but they also understand syntax. And when you start getting to syntax and causal relationships and things of this nature, that starts to get into understanding policy and where policy should be in effect and where it should not be in effect. So I think it's getting very interesting now in a lot of very good ways, because to kind of the points we're all sort of making, and Shubham, I'll throw this over to you, a lot of that stuff is just hindrance. It's risk management. It is important because you don't want to get penalized. I understand all that, but it's sure not very productive, and it sure isn't really adding value to the company. So the more you can automate that and deal with those issues dynamically, and then have an audit trail, and that's what the auditors are always going to want, is some audit trail. That's going to be, talk about giving comfort to the creative people. Creative people don't like to be put in boxes. But Shubham, what do you think about all that?
No, absolutely, because even I believe in the direction that AI could also be a very good, as it's a very good taskmaster. It could also be a very good checking system. So it can scan the stuff, and it can and if you can see the rise of models on the side of image recognition, in terms of text recognition and making sense of all of it, has evolved to a level where this could be possible, where and you can feed in where the syntax could be updated by a bunch of counsel of real lawyers, and at the same time, once that is approved, that could be the central thing, and then you don't have to govern everything. So and open that up to all the brands, like all the legal teams and stuff, so that you can stay compliant and do your work fast.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting, and maybe Eugene, I'll get you to comment on this before the next break. There was this story of a lawyer who went on and used ChatGPT to come up with his defense or of a particular client, and he went and he got just ripped apart because the ChatGPT invented the cases and all this kind of stuff like that. I realize that is a funny story, and that person was a fool to to do all that and not to vet things. But to me, it's almost like a red herring, because I got to tell you this: if you're an attorney and you're out there working in the world today and you don't pay attention to this whole technology space, you're just going to get bulldozed, because it's going to get to the point where it's fun. And Shubham was talking about this, having industry specific large language model ontologies, basically, which is what everyone's talking about. Praxi Data is talking about that. We're talking about that. Other people, they've kind of figured this out. So if you don't get on that train pretty quickly, it's going to be a very unpleasant scenario for you. So what I'm saying is, yes, that story is funny, but don't think that because some guy got in trouble, you shouldn't be looking into this technology and leveraging it as best you possibly can. What do you think, Eugene?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that as we expose some of these rough edges, and we start to, so Shubham was talking about hyper training models. So the guts of the architecture is becoming more and more refined, such that you can rely upon it to make logical inferences according to semantic rules that can be audited.
Right.
And so if you're positioned in the marketing space and you're not looking at making the most advantage of this kind of technology, 10 of your competitors are already in proofs of concept kind of projects, already testing it out. And so inside the company, you have to be thinking about getting your governance, your regulatory compliance people, getting their minds around that these tools are going to be competitive pressures from the outside. And just kind of pretending that they don't exist and we can wait is going to be a losing strategy.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And maybe Mark, I'll throw it over to you for a quick comment here before this next break. Content is king, and content will always be king. And I think humans are going to remain in this process. And the more humanized your content is, the better off you're going to be. So you use these tools almost like you think of industrial agriculture. You use these big machines, turbines, to go through and gin up the soil and get all that stuff going. But it's the care and the art of the human at the end that's going to make this stuff really work. What do you think?
Well, look, I think my creative friends would say that they can see the difference between a piece of really well thought through human creative and a piece of machine creative today. That line may actually start to blur. I think the more interesting question is, how is AI assisted content creation going to transform the nature of content? Mm-hmm. And how is it going to democratize creativity and allow people to create content that perhaps they might never have been able to, whether it's written content or visual? That's a really interesting problem. I think when we start to think about you kind of got first order and second order AI, right? First order AI is the basic stuff we've been seeing and playing with that has hallucinations and other things. Second order AI are these deep LLMs now being trained for specific purposes where they do extremely well along those vectors. That federated model, I think, is a model we believe in, where you're going to be able to dock a legal LLM or perhaps a localization LLM or whatever, and that as a whole is going to get you something really compelling in the same way that we've got video editors and visual creators and so on at the front end. So it's a federated model in our opinion. It's going to be very interesting to knit it all together.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's going to be a very interesting period of time. And I am a little bit worried about the reflection of a reflection of a reflection, which is kind of what we're starting to see now in terms of content. And, just how on your phone it recommends to say, oh, thanks, or, oh, I don't know, or whatever, like giving you these answers. It's like, I understand you're trying to make it easier so I don't have to write that stuff. But how is this going to slowly, incrementally, if insidiously, alter how we communicate with each other and enable AI to get better and better at masquerading as us? I mean, there are all these issues that are coming out. It's going to be fun to deal with, but don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio. What a fantastic show on Marche. AI and machine learning move forward. Great guests today. We're talking, of course, to my buddy Eugene Burke, but also Mark Ruddock of Kontent.ai. That's Kontent.ai, and Shubham A Mishra of Pixis, and I believe it's Pixis.ai, Pixis.ai, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. And we're talking all about this generative AI and content and understanding, orchestrating and moving it, getting it places, making sure it's working for you. And I had a little theory I've thrown out to folks in the last couple of shows. This whole show started, it's called DM Radio. It's all about data. Data management is the initial topic 16 and a half years ago or so. We launched this show, data warehousing, analytics, business intelligence. Then you get into dashboards and embedded analytics. Then, of course, IoT came around. And now you've got AI fundamentally transforming everything. And one of my operating theories is that the amount of time and effort that we put into data management, traditional data management, loading data warehouses, using data warehouses to kind of understand things, I think it's going to taper just a little bit because there's so much else that you can do on top of all that. And my theory is that you can get signal from other sources that are not going to require you to go through that whole data warehousing process. You're going to be able to get signal just by correlating feeds from various sources and then use that to make your decisions. And let's face it, the whole point of data warehousing is to be able to analyze data and understand what to do, to understand the numbers, to change your decision-making process. And I think that where we're going is to a certain extent short-circuiting that, but maybe I'm getting a bit over my skis. I'll throw it over to Mark first to comment on and then Shubham. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Look, I think there's no doubt that the ability to analyze real-time data and draw inferences from it and react in real time on it is growing in importance. So that is not a store and forward problem. That is a real-time reading problem, and I think there's value in that. I do think that there is value in archival data, though, and in understanding patterns and drawing conclusions from patterns. But the question is that best done in traditional data structures, or is that done in really a whole new model of data? And I think that we're starting to see databases and data environments structurally change fundamentally to incorporate these sort of new ways of doing things. The third thing I would say is that the way we query data and try to derive inference or analysis or conclusions from data, that's fundamentally changing today. You can ask a question and get an answer, or better still, you don't even have to ask. Something taps you on the shoulder and tells you the thing you need to know. And I think the final piece is, in a world where this data is so important and is coming at such a volume, maybe we ask AI to organize its own data and draw its own conclusions and store its own outputs. I think that's where some interesting stuff.
I like that.
That's what we've talked about too on the show. We talked about it. So you've talked about schema on read in the Hadoop world, right? Okay, let's just dump everything in the data lake. We'll do schema on read. All right, that didn't work out quite as well as people hoped. But what I keep looking for is letting the AI, to your point, design the business model, understand what's important, figure out where there's covariance and where there's not, and therefore don't spend so much time moving all this data around that you don't have to move around anymore because you've got the signal that you wanted. But Shubham, what do you think about all this?
Two approaches to look at it from my side. One is definitely that's where the things will converge, but it'll start from smaller pieces. For example, since we're talking about marketing, it will start with something like marketing or sales, where it can go through all your data, and you can simply ask the chatbot, how are my sales looking today, and what can I do better? So it becomes your partner. It becomes the most intelligent team member, and it goes through the data pieces. The second way to look at it is like from a deeper technical standpoint, where ultimately you build the schema, you have to do the embedding of all the data, like all the pieces, and then train and retrain the model with the data which you have. So now in order to do that, I don't know, we'll have to do a cost comparison. Is storing data cheaper versus paying for GPUs is cheaper?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Eugene, I'll throw it over to you. I mean, this is the sort of net analysis that we're going to have to start doing. And frankly, I don't think we really know what a lot of this stuff is going to cost right now. And this is one of the challenges with Silicon Valley in general, is that there's so much money that gets poured into these companies. It gets kind of hard to understand, what is the real ROI here? Is this a viable business model? When they pull the string on us, which they will, that can undermine our business operation. I mean, all these things come into play right now. And it's a very strange, it's a very dicey time. But Eugene, what do you think?
There are so many fundamental things that if we've been in this business for 30, 40 years, so many of the things that we counted upon as being fundamental, which are going to be rearranged. It's going to be forced upon us to rethink. To your point about data pipelines, they're so expensive and they're so brittle, and they can be obviated by some very simple changes, and all that investment becomes tech debt so quickly.
Right. That's right.
That it's a seductive thought that you just ask the AI to organize the data. To Shubham's point, if you ask your chat assistant, design content to optimally communicate with a 28 to 36-year-old female in this geography in order to maximize her attention on this, and then organize the data to support that marketing activity, that might actually be possible in a couple of years. And it'll go out and pick through the data swamp, pick the data that it wants, organize that data, and all of the heroic table smashing will be a thing of the past.
Yeah, Shubham, you want to comment on that?
I would say definitely yes, but we'll have to watch out when that happens and which industries will first adopt it. And obviously, I would say a few of the quick adopters for such kind of technologies are like one of my favorite is gaming. They pick up such technologies so fast, and the amount of data that you can pull in, and each and every aspect, the creator, it hits in right on the spot to build, implement, test out something over there. And then it'll branch out to, I would say, marketing, and then sales, and then later on to other segments.
That's probably true. And you just reminded me of something I learned on a call a few weeks ago. A company called Grid Raster is doing some very interesting work. They're actually using DevRev, another client of ours, to manage their code and their production. But they're doing, in the gaming world, they do 3D rendering. And what they figured out is you cannot have information going back and forth across the pipelines if you're going to render in real time, because for that end user, you have to experience everything as it's happening. And so they've kind of broken down the compute chain in such a fashion to be able to dynamically compute here and then over there, and then update this, then update that. It's just like, wow, that's interesting. I mean, that's just a very, very compelling story. And these are what the innovators are doing these days. I mean, it's really fascinating to see. But again, the cost structures, the management, the overhead, trying not to have things fall into to become de facto technical debt. I mean, these are all serious problems, but maybe just some closing thoughts. Mark Ruddock, I'll throw it over to you, Kontent.ai. The bottom line is, once you have content, you want to be able to optimize that flow. And I loved your idea about having the AI just kind of hover as you're typing and go, oh, that's a red flag. You're not supposed to use that word. Oh, yeah, don't use that. It's going to Arkansas. You don't want to use that. You want your helpers to be with you all along the way. Right, Mark?
Yeah, look, I think we don't yet fully comprehend the implications of what we're unleashing at this stage, in terms of the way it's going to change our workflows and so on. But one thing that I was thinking about as you were talking earlier was, we've seen a bizarre lesson in data compression recently. If you guys think about how these LLMs are trained, it takes an awful lot of data, an awful lot of computing horsepower. But when the LLM is actually built, it's extremely small. Like the body of human knowledge represented in ChatGPT is actually quite a small data set. That is a very interesting question in my mind as a paradigm. Like, what does that imply about the way in which data will be netted out and stored in the future? Where it's semantically compressed, not necessarily, zip compressed, if I can use a horrible analogy. Well, I think that's an interesting.
No, that's a very good point. Downsampling, right? You've kind of downsampled to this little kernel, and then you outsample. It actually reminds me of something that maybe these LLMs can pick up on. A British comrade of mine, I was in Malaysia years ago, and he was talking about how the Brits talk politics in particular in prime minister's questions, which I wish we would get in America with president's questions, where people just like throw in, they would have to answer and just see if they actually know stuff. I would love that. But it's reduce and magnify. And I was like, that's brilliant. Basically, a question comes in, you reduce it to the topic at hand, and then you magnify out to what you're doing in that space. So the question is about, oh, all the hospital beds are full. This is terrible. How are you going to solve this? Like, oh, we believe very strongly in healthcare, and our plan is to do X, Y, Z. Reduce and magnify. That's what they do all the time, and it's brilliant. It's a great way to solve these problems. Well, folks, podcast bonus segment is coming up next. Send me an email if you want to be on the show. info@dmradio.biz. You've been listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on a fantastic show on Marche, AI, machine learning, move forward. And Mark Ruddock from Kontent.ai, that's KONTNT.ai. I'll throw it over to you. I think you're exactly right that we don't really know the nature of what we're unleashing on the world here. It's going to be a bit of a rough ride. What's your advice to organizations beyond perhaps not trying to plan out for a year? You got to plan out for like 3 months at a time these days. But what's your advice for how business managers and executives can get their footing and get their sea legs in this new topsy-turvy world?
You've got to be current. Like, I think you're going to be crushed if you're not current. And so being current means being open-minded and understanding kind of the edge of technology, perhaps having ways to play with and experiment with some of that technology and be very tactile on it. I learned from my grown-up sons, by the way, who started really exploring ChatGPT very early, that the more they worked with it, the more insights they got into how powerful it could be and what it could do. I think if companies are laser focused and not looking at that more broadly, they're going to miss these step changes. And I think it's so unpredictable right now that the change is going to happen to you if you're not at the edge. And I think you need to be at the edge a little bit. So that would be my advice.
I think that's excellent advice. And I'm glad you brought in the step change concept from chemistry, right? A step change is not just an incremental change. It's a very significant alteration of what was happening. Shubham, I'll throw that over to you for the same question. What's your advice to your clients or to prospects or even to your business partners about how to prepare yourself and how to get your sea legs in this crazy new world of ours?
I think first of all, to the marketing teams, you should subscribe to Pixis, start using it, and and then the second thing is, like, on the side where the way we are looking at it is that every department will be accompanied by data scientists, and like even marketing right now, the way org structures are structured. They have data analysts, but they do not have data scientists. So it'll evolve in a manner where they'll start keeping a few data scientists to work with solutions in the full depth and depth manner. And we've seen that across some of the customers who are spending more than north of $100 million or $200 million every year on digital marketing. They've already adopted this kind of tactic, and now it'll trickle down to everyone out there, so that the interaction of them with a solution like Pixis could be even more deeper and even more sophisticated.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And real quick, on the Pixis front, I'd be curious to know about pricing and how you handle all that stuff. But I'm almost more curious around visibility and transparency and what can you see in that environment. You talked about adding a column and just having a score in there, but how deep can someone go into understanding how Pixis is analyzing things and what those rules look like and all that fun stuff?
So first year, when we launched the solution, we got just within 2 months, we got several complaints that you're selling us a black box. It doesn't tell us anything. So, and that's when we took a step back. What we built basically, every action which AI takes, you can just single click on it. It gives you the whole mind map of AI. What triggered that particular creation generation, and with the confidence score. And later on, what we did basically, we added that in the control. So even if you go to Pixis right now, you can just click on it, it'll generate, and then it'll give you confidence score. If the AI doesn't have that much of confidence score, it'll tell you. But still, you want to experiment because it helps you feed more and more data. You can do that.
Yeah, that gets very interesting, because it's kind of like what Mark just said a moment ago, with his kids. The more they play with these things, the better they understand what they're capable of and kind of how they work. And, you know, some of the early stories, I've already ragged on the guy from the New York Times a couple of times where it said, oh, you should leave your wife and all this kind of stuff. He was asking it the wrong questions. I mean, he led ChatGPT down the garden path, in my opinion. But maybe closing comments from you, Eugene, on where we're going with all this and how you're preparing for it.
I think where we're going is we will know that it's ready when a ChatGPT or a large language model experience can tell us with some firmness the boundaries of what it knows that it knows and when it knows that it doesn't know something. And that kind of hinges on what Shubham was just saying, that if you can trace the nested inference chain,
Right.
then you can audit what it's doing. You can say, okay, it did 10 reasonable things based on probability, right?
Right.
Yep.
I love it. Yeah, I think you called it an epistemological boundary, right?
An epistemological boundary. Yes.
I think that is a fantastic term. Well, folks, look these gentlemen up online. Eugene Burke, of course, our good friend Mark Ruddock, and Shubham Mishra. Fantastic innovations. You folks are on the cutting edge. I think you're all right about this stuff. And I can't wait to start using it and having more fun. Send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. You've been listening to DM Radio.